Hey, everybody, and thank you for joining the Bro Chat for a Somber event, which on this Memorial Day weekend, we thought we'd take an opportunity to get back together and talk about some of our friends over the years. Unfortunately, flying jets means that I was told a long time ago that it's not inherently dangerous, but it's extremely unforgiving. And I think flying jets is exactly that. So we'll talk about some of our friends that we've lost along the way, and remember those people. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody, all of the Afterburn podcast fans and the Kodiak Shack podcast fans. So thank you all for being here, and we'll let Rain take it away.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This definitely it's somber, and it's kind of weird when you start to look back, like how fast things have moved along, and then you start looking at the list of the buddies who are not here. But mine started right off the get-go, and I'll start with Alec Littler. Share a quick picture for those who are watching over on YouTube. But Alec and I met when we started ASBC. So right when we commissioned as second lieutenants, we had to go to Maxwell for a 6-week course there. Alec is unique. He had an Australian accent. He grew up, he was American, but spent several years, like his early days, in Australia. So he had this like thick Australian accent. We had a lot of fun together in our 6 weeks at ASBC. I had some good advice to avoid underground Atlanta for him. And I know he went to underground Atlanta for like a short TDY weekend and then had someone get shot like right by him. It was kind of a crazy thing of I told you so, but Alec went to pilot training at Shepherd, and unfortunately he was killed in a T-38 crash in 2008. So that was kind of like the intro to the aviation, military aviation world for me. While I was waiting to go to pilot training, I met an individual, Sean Ruane. Sean, again, phenomenal individual like all these guys are. He was just coming out of pilot training, or just coming out of HH-60 training. And I was waiting to go to pilot training, hanging out down at Moody Air Force Base. So I watched Sean as he was like a young co-pilot in the HH-60 flying around, but he was one of those guys who always looked out for the younger dudes, such as myself. And Sean, unfortunately, he was killed in a helicopter crash. I believe they struck a flock of birds in England. But that was another one who's no longer with us, but another great American who gave his life in defense of this nation. And before I hand it over, I've talked about it on my podcast. We did a whole breakdown of this, but Pyro was killed in my last deployment. Pyro was a unique individual. He was one of those, like the lifeblood of the squadron that always, brought the energy and people wanted to be around. And it's just weird now that, like these guys aren't here. They're still in my phone, which I don't know if you guys delete contacts or if things have updated throughout the years, but the advent of like smartphones, I'm always reminded because these guys are still on my phone with pictures and phone numbers and things like that. But Pyro was, like I mentioned, he was killed on our deployment, coming back to the base. But again, phenomenal American and individual who all he wanted to do was fly fast jets and defend freedom. So honored to have just been around those guys for just a little bit and be able to call them friends. So I'll hand it over to Bender.
All right. So I knew Pyro as well. He was in my flight in, what do you call it, the ROTC summer training. I can't remember what, field training.
Yeah.
Same though. So even though he hadn't flown fighter jet, he had that same kind of personality, lifeblood of the flight. Everybody loved him. And honestly, I wouldn't be flying without his advice, which he knew some friends that had gotten laser surgery to get their vision corrected so they'd go to pilot training. And I was nervous about doing that. And he was like, if you want to be a pilot, you just got to make it happen. Like, you can't be afraid. And so I did it, and it worked out for me. So thanks to Pyro. I'll talk about MEZr next. So MEZr was a gambler, and he was getting to the squadron as I was kind of finishing up my time at Shaw. So we crossed paths a couple times. And the last person I talked to in the bar before I PCS, so it was my last day before we drove out, was MEZr, and he was excited. He was about to get named, and just that energy that you get from the punks is there in their first fighter squadron. He touched a lot of lives, even in the short time that he was a gambler. So, and we talked in some detail about his accident as well. But he was doing some pretty hard stuff, and it's just a reminder of again, we ask a lot of really all the service members, but pilots flying at night, tanking in pretty tough conditions, and MEZr, he was kind of deep in it when that went down. And then I'll talk also about Major Blair Faulkner and student Lieutenant Matt Emmons. This happened when I was at Columbus Air Force Base. He was a class ahead of me. So we had hung out a bit, and so he had already tracked the T-38s, and I was about to track, I think a couple nights from that accident, but their T-38 had an aileron failure right on takeoff, so the worst possible luck, and it flipped the jet over, and neither of those two were able to get out in time. So it was pretty sombering right at that moment. Kind of see that happen right at the beginning of my pilot experience, and I'll never forget those two. And then I think it goes to Vader from here.
Yeah. Thanks, Bender. And unfortunately, you're always happy that it's a small community because you know everybody. But then when someone does end up, dying in a crash, then everybody knows them. So MEZr was one of my students. If you are watching, and the picture that was up of him was when he was in the 8th Fighter Squadron. So I flew with him on 2 sorties, I believe. And a great guy, C-17 Loadmaster, who got rated or got picked up to go to pilot training, and then F-16. So awesome dude. It was definitely sad to see him go. The first person I'll talk about is Cajun. So he was Thunderbird 4. He unfortunately crashed in 2018, and I saw him about a month prior. So I was out at Nellis where the Thunderbirds are, and we were hanging out and just it was catching up. We were in Misawa, Japan together. He was my instructor pilot for my flight lead upgrade, one of my sorties, ACM. It went slightly below average, as you would expect from me. And but yeah, he was a great instructor, a great guy. And I don't know if he came up with it in the fighter community, but I definitely heard it from him first. And he said, just be a good dude. And I think that was one of the things that he tried to do. And he definitely instilled that in the younger generation as he instructed them and taught them the way of the fighter pilot. So it was definitely he was a great example of what it means to be a fighter pilot, a good person, good fighter pilot. And so it was sad to see him go as well. And then the other person I'll be talking about is Guns Garin. So Guns Garin Memorial Foundation, a bunch of the people in the squadron started a nonprofit after his passing. When you fly jets, you don't assume you're going to lose any friends flying planes, but when they end up passing away flying planes, it's a little more, not understandable, but you kind of are like, okay. But sadly, Guns had just what would be considered a normal or a non-invasive or not a big deal procedure, and sadly it went sideways, and so Gunn ended up passing away as a young guy for not even in the airplane. But what he did do, he was a weapons officer, so a tactical leader in the squadron, and the weapons schools always talk about humble, approachable, credible, and he was all of the above. I mean, he was one of the most fun guys in the squadron, but he was also one of the most tactical guys in the squadron. So it was great to learn from him and to work for him and with him. So I appreciated that chance. And the Guns Garin Memorial Foundation, any of the people who listen either to the Afterburn or the Kodiak Shack podcast, we've had them on talking about the good stuff they're doing. So we appreciate that our friends are still keeping his name alive and doing good things, because Guns was definitely a good dude. And then
absolutely.
Yeah.
This I don't know. Yeah, we were talking like this. This is not easy stuff, and it doesn't matter how many times you go through it. Like, obviously, the only thing you can do is carry these guys' legacy on. Be thankful for what they did and what they were and what they meant and what they stood for. And I wish I was more eloquent with words and could do it better, but here I am with Guns in particular. I was actually just editing, and it's also going to come out with this, but when I went up to the golf tournament, I sat down with his wife, Kelly. We learned a little bit more about Guns and the foundation, what they're doing, which is incredible stuff. And then, I got to meet one woman who was helped by the foundation, Kelsey. Her husband was a Marine Osprey pilot killed last summer in a crash. And so I know we're talking about the guys that really we knew, but like obviously hundreds of thousands of people have died in service of this country. So we're only scratching the surface, and this is definitely not an all-inclusive list, but yeah, just I guess it's a small tribute, hopefully, to pay homage to just a small portion and make people, again, be appreciative for all the freedoms we have, because people have laid down the line. Before we go, I think we were talking beforehand too, just a few other individuals that I know we didn't know personally, but it definitely impacted the community we were a part of and are still a part of for the most part. But I know everyone has talked about, or most have heard about Trojan. I actually had Admiral Fox, Admiral being in the Navy, spoke about this. So Trojan was killed strafing in Iraq. And one of the prominent things, I think there is the bridge at Luke going across the main road there is named for Trojan. But a prime example, killed in combat, but it took 10 years to actually find him and repatriate his remains. So you can just imagine what the family was going through during that time period. But, it touched so many different facets, and I think it also shows just how woven together this community is. Moose is another one that I actually flew with a few of the guys from his squadron in the last year or so talking about this. But Moose was killed, transitioned in F-15 down from Barnes, then came down to New Orleans to get some radar work done on it. I have not read the accident report verbatim, but I think at high altitude there was some suspected that there was hypoxia involved, and being in the high 40s, there's not a lot of time for you to recognize. And I think it possibly is recognized. I don't know if you guys know any more about it, but I think the effects were starting to happen. He was trying to get the jet down safely and lost consciousness, I think is what they assumed. And then Kage Allen, young Eagle driver, I guess this is now 2 years ago, coming up, lost his life in England on an intercept. I think a high to low intercept with some weather, and hit the deck there. But again, it just shows how unforgiving this environment is. You're flying high performance aircraft, and a couple inches left or right can mean the difference between life or death. So I don't know. You guys got any other closing parting shots before we wrap up here? I'm grateful to have served and know each one of these guys or hear their stories. And, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and these are the giants' shoulders we stand on.
I think one thing is for Moose, it said there, gone but not forgotten. And I think when I went through 38s, there was a plaque on the wall from one of the pilots that crashed in 38s previous. And then in the C model now, the cockpit altimeter, every time it starts up, has a picture of a little picture of a moose, remembering Moose. So I think, the fact that these things happen is sadly it's somewhat common, but the reality is you got to take them with you and remember those things because there's lessons learned, and then there's those people had an impact on you, and they had families and everything. So it's definitely important to remember those people. But thanks for meeting up for this, guys.
Yeah, thanks. And the last thing I'll say is just a nickel in the grass for these fellas, which is a common fighter pilot saying that Rain maybe can explain better at some point with some nice visual effects. But honestly, it's good to think about them at least a couple times a year. Remember what they gave up.
Yeah, nickel in the grass. And despite all the noise that goes on, I think in the news and the media and life, like we live in a pretty great country, and there's some amazing individuals who have sacrificed and made the ultimate sacrifice so that we can enjoy these freedoms. So this weekend we honor them. So if you're sitting by the pool or at the beach, I hope you're doing that and enjoying it, because that's what those guys would want, and that's what they want you to be doing. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for all the blessings I have because of guys like this.
Yeah, same.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. See ya, fellas.
See ya.
See ya.